in and saw the people in the other hubs and introduced ourselves. And now we're getting ready to do our individual presentations.
Yeah, and we're gonna be recording it so other people in the group can see after and all that.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Okay, Camille, whenever you want to get started.
Okay, cool. All right. So during my first CNU Congress in Louisville, I wanted to get involved in climate action. As someone who grew up in Miami, the climate crisis is critical. I hoped CNU would provide an opportunity, but found that the movement lacked focus in this arena while growth and development policy impacts the planet's future. The leaders of past generations appear ill-equipped to motivate young people who know that climate solutions can't wait. I expressed these feelings to Patty Steinschneider on Nathan Norris's City Bus Exchange tour a week before the Congress, and he gave me a stage during CNU's Open Innovation Day to talk about my passions. I wanted to shift the culture from dominating old white men to the motivated and innovative younger generation. Young people are best equipped to shape our future. The pub crawl and social events at the Congress allowed me to connect with others who yearned for opportunities to elevate climate action at CNU and shake up a stale movement. Plans to hold a place summit began soon after, aimed to gather the passionate group I met. As early 2020 unfolded, the COVID-19 crisis uncovered deep social inequities brought to light through the Black Lives Matter protest. Climate change predicts an uncertain future with new public health threats, and this global pandemic proves society is not ready to handle crises in solidarity. The intersection of climate, racial injustice, and urbanism lent a new focus. Place Summit was held virtually in mid-2020. It had no specific goal by design, rather provided an opportunity for people to express their passion, concerns, and future hope at the intersection of these critical issues. Through 2 days of short presentations and self-guided discussions, participants were motivated to take action and begin forming a plan. Following the summit, a small group of participants decided to keep going. The only thing in the way of change is underestimating your ability to be a change maker. Place Initiative was born of the hope for an equitable future where people can work together in solidarity to thrive in the face of future challenges. Our group began meeting regularly, establishing a mission, plan of action, and selecting the name Place Initiative. Place represents the importance of community and stands for the intersection of climate change and equity. Proactive leadership advocating for climate equity. Place hopes to establish partnerships and grow leadership around change in policy and advocacy to achieve people-centric solutions to the climate-driven challenges of our future. Place Initiative is aimed at influencing top-down policymaking and bottom-up advocacy to address climate and equity. We have put together a network of resources and people who have proven that great urbanism can provide far-lasting systemic improvements in response to the climate crisis. We are building resource sheets, pictured here, to communicate the connections between place, climate, and equity. Our goal is to clarify the complex topics at this intersection and recommend strategies and policy priorities that can be actionable in policymaking and advocacy. We've created a series of climate and urbanism-focused policy recommendations for the Biden administration. We hope to provide agency staff with tools to improve policy decisions. We're also currently working on a project led by ELTF's very own Baxter Hankin to identify climate receiver places across the country to receive climate migrants. We've already identified over 500 cities and towns and are beginning to create a receiving geography guide, resiliency overview, toolkit, implementation guide, and case studies to provide to civic leaders to better equip places for current and future climate migration. This past May, Place Initiative hosted a virtual Urban Thinkers Campus in partnership with the UN Habitat's World Urban Campaign and CNU. This event elevated urbanism as a platform of participatory, inclusive solutions to climate change. We drew on industry leaders to lead discussions on urbanism's central role in climate response. The event acted as a stepping stone in our effort to reach influential individuals and policymakers and to focus our resource sheet and advocacy efforts to be as effective as possible. Next month, we'll have a Place Initiative representative speaking at the UN Co-op 26 event in Nairobi, Kenya, about our outcomes from the UTC. Our goal is clear. We need to build a future where everyone has the support needed to thrive, and only then are we truly able to sustain a vibrant society through challenging times. To address climate change, we need an equitable society. Place Initiative seeks to be a part of the solution necessary to build a just future. Our story demonstrates the power that individuals have when they meet, share ideas, and work together as change makers. I'm excited to see what the outcomes of this year's Place Summit brings to the Emerging Leaders Task Force and for the individuals that attend. Thank you.
Woo! Hi everybody, I'm Christopher DeVico, if you don't already know me from Miami or wherever, but I'm a Harvard GSD and Miami alum. Soon, be going back to Miami, and I just wanted to talk today about a particular project, not this project, however, this project was the catalyst for the project that I'm talking about. It all started when the Squamish First Nation group from Vancouver made headlines by using some of their land to build towers in Vancouver. This was the Singeh Towers, the proposal that they planned on making, like right in downtown. So one of the interesting things about this project it all started with this one project Singeh, in which basically when they were trying to design new communities and wondering how to use their land, because they're sovereign of the Canadian government, they released a law in Canada that basically said that all of their buildings are as of right, meaning they can build regardless of what the government or any developer or any planning agency tells them, which I thought was like super cool. So, which brings me to our project Confluence, in which the Squamish Nation actually came and asked us to generate a series of proposals. They have, different tracts of land all over British Columbia, and they wanted to look at different ideas just, to see what new communities they could design and how they could design them. So the new project that we decided, me and my partner, David Bemperad, is called Confluence because it's a community centered around the belief that anything built should be for at least 7 generations. Every time someone from Squamish switches on a light switch, they use the grid, which in turn burns more fossil fuels, which unfortunately undermines indigeneity by not only destroying the environment, but also by quite literally cutting through all of this territory with pipelines, railways, vast highways. Right now, their electricity usage in Vancouver is, relatively green, but not all electricity is energy, and vice versa. It also happens to do with, how you heat your homes. Currently, we say energy antagonizes indigeneity because of the way that they're getting their energy, because it's quite literally coming through their territory, and it's really not helping them in the long run. So this is a breakdown of all the energy resources that Vancouver currently use, and as you can see, natural gas and gasoline is a huge chunk of that, particularly for heating. So we tried to figure out ways in which you could incorporate electricity into the design of a community in a way that's not just like plug and play into the grid. We also say that land is energy. Too often the land is used for ceaseless, faux green developments that use up resources. It might be LEED certified, but is it really good for the environment? Who's to say? Furthermore, energy, once this is transferred down to the idea of a single family home, also antagonizes indigeneity. It advances development, et cetera, et cetera. So we see these all as cycles that could be renewable in theory, right? But all of a sudden, when you start to add in things like exploitation and profit and short-term solutions for problems that don't necessarily take into the account of the Squamish idea for 7 generations, that all of a sudden you go into a non-renewable cycle that eventually ends in catastrophe, right? We all kind of know this story. So with the help of the community through a number of interviews with Squamish leadership and members, we chose a site that had 3 different characteristics. Lots of land, a potential for renewable energy, and a potential source of wealth building for the community long-term, because it's not like they've had their government for super, super long, like they've had to reinvent themselves as the Canadians have become more accommodating of Indigenous peoples. So they're trying to basically build more communities and build more developments that they can be considered sovereign from the Canadians, which I think is awesome. So outside of Vancouver, we found an untouched reservation that we were looking to develop that could do all 3. Now, to understand how to make energy, the Squamish often utilize hydro plants and run-of-river electricity. I won't bore you with the semantics, but it's frozen. So these are basically just a bunch of different sites around Vancouver that they use hydro plants to produce electricity, which I thought was pretty cool that they're already doing that. So I won't bore you with the semantics, but you need a really high elevation, an existing water source that is consistent, and a large turbine to power the community. If you calculate the flow rate of the community without disturbing wildlife, we found that you could actually power a community of up to 370 homes. We basically just took the entire watershed area, found how it was flowing down the mountain, found the precipitation and the flow rate of the Squamish River nearby, and were able to do some quick calculations. So based off of this framework, we also wanted to think of this idea of a green pipeline, that this isn't something that necessarily cuts through nature, but is incorporated into nature and incorporated into the design of the community as a public amenity. So all of this is of course part of a cycle. We wanted to utilize the hydro plants and run-of-river electricity. And then this basically starts at Evans Lake, which is at the top of the small mountain, and then kind of works its way down, starting as a pier, and then becoming the actual, well, it's called like the penstock, which brings all the water down, and basically creating it as a trail that kind of takes you through the woods, which acts as an educational opportunity and as a public amenity for recreation, etc. So, of course, communities aren't just public amenities, they're also houses, there's commercial areas, there's a ton of different things that make up communities. So we wanted to introduce the powerhouse as the main community center, which really draws everything together. It's at the confluence between this trail and this water coming down that powers the community. It's also at the confluence between the main road and I mean, it's out in the middle of like nowhere, right? So there's one main road and a series of houses that they're existing, but we're looking at expanding the capability for housing, because that's also a big need for the Squamish, as a lot of Indigenous peoples are homeless in Canada because of generational wealth, et cetera, et cetera. But that was a big ask for them as well. In addition to that, we imagined a community programming and pop-up area, because we know that they didn't necessarily want to invest in like this crazy dense commercial district right away, because it's out in the middle of nowhere, but they still want to be able to sell things, engage with each other, et cetera. And then we made the design for a modular typology in which these are more traditional or geared towards the traditional Squamish type, in which many people live in one place. It's kind of like an apartment building, but at the similar-ish scale of a single family detached home that uses, similar to their own typologies, a modular grid made out of cedar units, which I thought was really cool that their own typologies were modular. So it uses cedar plank infill, a raisable basing in case the area floods, because it's in a bit of a valley, and plug and play basically into this very localized grid. So how do we build all of these different houses? I was talking about a cycle before. The wood has to come from somewhere. The wood for the penstock, the wood for the trail, the wood for the houses, all of these things take time, energy, and of course material. So surrounding this entire area is a community managed forest, which, as you can see, kind of blows out of proportion the entire area of what their IR is right now. And they own a lot of this. So the idea is that they continue their practices of forestry management, and they continue to be able to take down the trees and also tend to the forest and use it for tourism, for jobs, et cetera, but doing it in a way that is sustainable, is well managed, because right now they're just basically making sure that whatever they cut down is going to grow back in a couple of years. So doing it in a way that isn't just clear cutting. This also invites the opportunity for community construction projects. So for all those different public spaces as well as the houses, Indigenous peoples don't have to rely on giant construction company developers coming in to build all of their housing. It's on them, and in that way they can be sovereign and they don't have to deal with other people taking advantage of it. So these are just some final images to show you different portions of the project, like the creek trail section that brings them through the Squamish River. And then finally at the Squamish River Pier where it terminates. Fishing is a really big part of their culture, especially salmon and eating salmon, and it's really, I guess, satisfying, and it's just something about being connected with the entire world around you, and the cycles of the fish going up and down along toward patterns and all that. So in any case, This would create opportunities for jobs, educating young people about the forest and environmental processes, community-built efforts, tourism, and just places for the Squamish to gather and be able to be reverent for everything that surrounds and sustains them. So thank you guys so much for letting me present this project Confluence. And a special thank you to the Squamish community for allowing us to work with them and being interested enough to allow designers from the GSD to help them out. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm talking about cookies, not really. So here's 4 things that I care about in roughly 5 minutes.
Yay.
So the first one is quite relevant, I think, to this group overall, and that's making space and building respect for rising voices. So this image was our last in-person Play Summit in Cincinnati a couple of years ago. But one of our first Play Summits was in New Orleans years and years ago. This is some awesome contraption that we just found hanging out on the street in New Orleans. And Camille talked about the Play Summit she organized. These things are really about getting people together. It's really important to get people together, to meet, to be inspired by each other, to work together to make change. So the last time around, emerging leaders had to really take a punk rock approach to this. Right? We had to rebel against the system that had become entrenched and interested in only hearing from those who had demonstrated decades of professional accomplishment. It's not really a good thing. And so it took a lot of time there's a delay. It took a lot of time to open up the power structures, to sort of blast them open. And our efforts, we lost a lot of good people because they just couldn't wait that long. It just took years and years of slow movement and change. But now the path is open, as you'll see our parting in the sea, and we need to engage young voices, support young leaders. So I'm really excited on this first one about this group. What you're going to get done. So get shit done, and at least from the ENU side of things, there's plenty of room to make change. I'm the person at the top now. So there's not a barrier for your involvement, for you to take leadership, because this movement is not about leading from the top. It's bottom up, and it's something that we're now enforcing, sort of reinforcing that at the top. In fact, we're having those discussions where one of the first things with bringing Rick on that we push for is to ensure to engage the membership, to bring them together, to let ideas and leadership bubble up. Because CNU had drifted astray for a little while and had been wandering in the woods, but the directive now is to empower the movement, to engage more voices, to let it all bubble up, and y'all are an important part of that. So that's 1 of 4 in maybe 5 minutes, because of the delay. Go. Okay. So the next thing that I care about, which is relevant and indirectly related to that last piece, is broken systems of representation. Inequity is reinforced in systems of power and control. We all know this. But just like inequities of racism, these structures also discriminate based on age, wealth, level of education. Too many people are really distracted by the whole national politics thing, and they ignore the importance of local issues, which is really where most opportunities exist to make change. With a little research some years ago with our colleague Andreessen in Portland, we found that as cities get larger, individuals have a lesser degree of representation in local government. The chart that's on the left, this is sort of early research, and you can actually see what the hell's going on there. But in that early research, we found that Los Angeles, for example, over here on that dot, Los Angeles has 260,000 people per city representative, right? And there's like no way any of those representatives have a real connection with residents, understanding their lives, their aspirations, their struggles. The chart on the right, this bigger one, that's our further research, showing more places, and we plotted it on a log scale, and you can see it's a very clear relationship between the size of a city and how many people per representative. So the bigger places are getting, we're not changing up our systems, and they're becoming less representative of the population. But our form of government doesn't really have to be static. We choose our form of government. We choose the number of representatives. We choose the rules. We choose the policies that we want to make. And so really to make change about what matters, more people, especially young people, need to get involved in local governance and change the rules to be equitable and to be representative. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3. Number 3. Number 3. Number 3. Number 3 is climate migration. And Camille showed a slide of Baxter's work, which is really important in this. We have a lot of change coming in the near future. Many people are going to be displaced. And it doesn't have to be that way. Interestingly, this is also tied to that prior issue of representation and governance. Local and regional change are necessary, but that change is not going to be made without representatives who are concerned about the future of all people. Now, a core structure in making needed change and the impact of climate change in people's lives are what I like to think of as 3 groups of people. The first are those who are paying attention to climate change and have the ability to make adjustments in their lives to move away from disaster. They're doing it. This is one of the many reasons I got out of Miami. Sorry, going back. And these are the able and aware people. They know and they can do something about the way that climate change impacts their lives, and they're making that change already. The next group really doesn't need to worry. They'll be able to move, they'll be able to pay for insurance, retain jobs, have new opportunities for employment elsewhere or in new industries. And unfortunately, they control the levels of power, local, regional, and national governments. And this affluent and ignorant group benefits from the masses being too busy supporting their families, affording clothes and food, too focused on life's necessities to stand up and demand action on climate change. Now, the last group, which is the largest group, is the climate refugee. And most people don't have the means, the vast majority of people don't have the means to deal with the impact of climate change and what it'll have on their lives. And they are the least represented by our systems of governance. This is not just a local crisis, it's a global crisis. The refugee group is going to be vast. It's going to be the vast majority of people. These are people that we need to be concerned for, we need to have compassion for, and directly affects our efforts of, and really we need to direct our efforts to support this group. That's why we're trying to be proactive, to work ahead, because the other 2 groups are going to be fine, but there's a real issue for these people. We need to approach that with compassion. Number 4. So the 4th thing that I care about, and there's other things, but this sort of, it turns out thinking about this, it kind of relates to the last one. And that's the issue of excessive economic concentration in a limited number of places. And this is really why housing is impossibly expensive here, impossibly expensive where I live, in all big cities. These are places where the high-paying jobs and most intellectually fulfilling jobs are located, so people go there, right? That's where the opportunity is. Slides. When we were mapping places that'll fare well with the next 50 years of climate change, I couldn't find it. Camille had a better map, I couldn't find it. But we ran across countless numbers of small places that are going to be in perfectly good shape. This is just the US, it's a global crisis, but we're looking at the US here. Tons of places, but there's really no economic opportunity there. People aren't going there. You can afford a house, easy. You can afford to live, low cost of living overall, but there's not opportunity for jobs. There's not opportunity to build a sort of a network of a social network. There's not places to go to meet people. Now we know you can build the physical structure that makes places pleasant to live. We know how to construct that to give people opportunities to be social. But unfortunately, opportunities to build a career in these places are extremely limited. They're limited to only a handful of places in this country. And places that continue to be expensive, trapping people in unsustainable cycles and alienating most of the population as a part of that. But that excessive concentration is not a given. We can grow the economies in more places, and doing so means that there will be more opportunity for more people, opportunity for career building, opportunity to afford places to live, opportunities to connect socially, build networks, support causes, start new initiatives and businesses. So that was 4 things that I care about.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kurtz. So, what I would like to talk about today, as we were talking about before, is the students' new urbanism. So, I know we just talked about it, but who has been a part of an SNU? Okay. So, I'm going to be talking specifically about Notre Dame and based on my experience at Notre Dame, how I imagine it's going everywhere else, and also what I've heard from other people as well. So, generally speaking, I know that outreach is something that we're all pretty concerned about. We really want to get into a much broader variety of audiences, especially when it comes to people who are students at different schools, and then also the schools that are supposedly new urbanist schools but don't aren't actually engaged in CNU to a large degree, and also to people, of course, who are not in college, people who choose not to go to college or are out of college already or whatever. How do we reach out to those people as well? So what does it look like right now? This is in my opinion, but largely there is no connection to CNU. This is a photo of me, and that's SNU at Notre Dame, and that's also Notre Dame students. But anyway, so there really isn't a connection to CNU. Even though technically Notre Dame was a registered SNU, at CNU, we didn't receive a single email from CNU about anything ever. There was no connection, absolutely none. And especially coming from Notre Dame, where it's supposedly there are a lot of new urbanist professors and students, it's how is there so little connection? And I think there's a big problem is also that, these are students who they're still learning. Base level learning, do not know anything. They just know they like walkability, maybe. And that interest can turn into someone being really involved in new urbanism. But instead, in my experience, it was, I was the president, my friend was the vice president. We were really passionate about it, but we also didn't really know anything. So it meant a lot of time that we did not have to spare. Trying to research topics, just struggling, absolutely struggling, trying to find any resources that we could read through quickly to try to get the gist of an idea. What is the transect? Nobody had any idea. We did not, base level, you would think we would have talked about that, at least in theory at school. That was not talked about. They showed a diagram that everybody has seen, and they're like, this is the transect, move along. By the way, seaside happened, move along. Okay, and that was it. And it's really? That's the best that we can do. So I think that as far as resources go, it's just students throwing together presentations, throwing together slides, trying to come up with events that will actually interest students. Because to be honest, they're students, how are you going to convince them to, spend time when they're already pressed for time, coming to these meetings, coming to events, whatever? You have to really kind of strong arm people into coming to begin with. And then also just the lack of support and guidance. So, there could be this connection to local CNU chapters. There could be connections to other, emerging leaders who are young, also still learning, but know a little bit more. And that's not there either. And I think that's a really lost opportunity. No. It'll change. But what can SNU look like in the future? So to start, a couple months back, I started looking for, where are the existing SNUs? Is there even a record of where these clubs used to be, or maybe still are? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Nobody knows where they are. I did manage to search for a long time and find the archived CNU website, and it did list a handful of SNUs. Notre Dame was included. The contact information was well past old. And the other schools that were listed, trying to find them, SNUs do not exist there anymore. So I think the first step is really reaching out to the ones, first of all, trying to see if anybody, anywhere has any record of where SNUs may have been. reach out to those schools, find out if anybody's still active. And then the second part is those schools that may still have it, send them a survey, just find out like how many people are they engaging with, you know, what are their events like, what do they need help with? I suspect it is a lot of what I've already said, but there may be other things that I'm not thinking of. So I think it's important to get a sense of how can we actually help students? Because I do think this is a really big opportunity to get involved with, you know, we start off with just the existing ones, but this can seriously grow to many other schools. So it's a huge opportunity in that sense. And then this is a little bit more long-term, but as far as like I was saying, like students who, you know, really don't have time to teach themselves before teaching someone else and creating presentations and creating fun events that will actually get people to show up, why not actually create, you know, a database? There used to be something to that effect where there were like 5, you know, 5 PowerPoint ideas. It's really old, it's not that great. Why not we actually make that something more substantial? Something where it's like, okay, you want to talk to the club about form-based codes. Here is, if not a presentation, at least go to this website, you know? So, sorry. And then finally, the panel discussion, which a handful of us have already talked about before, but we were planning to do it for the ELTF, but just to have a panel discussion, whether it's actually a session at CNU, or if it's just, you know, a biannual thing, is that people can be exposed to other emerging professionals. So, you know, people who are new to the field, but still, again, know a little bit more than the students, right? Because even just seeing someone a couple years above you really helps quite a bit. Okay. So, how do we actually start connecting with, in terms of the Emerging Leader Task Force and these students? So, here we go. Okay, so one thing we've already talked about, of course, is the book club. I'm going to be honest with you, I do not think students will really show up to that. We did try to do book clubs, and we did one in the summer during COVID, and it was really helpful. A lot of students enjoyed that. But the thing is that during the school year, I mean, students are not gonna do that, it's not realistic. But you know, in the summers, we can perhaps rope them into that as well. I do think the Slack channel, as we've discussed, it could absolutely grow. We're starting to put in the infrastructure to make this possible, but it means that every time that a new person joins, especially if they're a student, that, you know, they enter, they take the survey that I hope you all took, and it kind of gets a sense of what is your level of knowledge, what are your interests, what is your background, and that way, you know, as administrators, we could introduce people to others who could mentor them, who could help them, and really start to engage with people even if they really don't know anything. Because as we all know, there's nothing worse than when you feel like you really should not be in this conversation because you don't have anything to give, you don't know anything, but you're really interested, so you still want to be part of the conversation. So I think that's really important. And yeah, mentorship, I think, could absolutely be a part of that and all come together. So the last thing, I'm just going to leave with a question. If it'll pop up, which is, oh my goodness.
Yes.
Okay. So how can we start to engage with students at schools who do not teach new urbanism? So that's a big question, of course. And it's like, on one hand, there are, you know, we can reach out to the schools that we each went to. That's definitely a starting point. But of course, a handful of us went to schools that very much support new urbanism. So it's more about reviving things than starting fresh. But there are definitely schools where it's not talked about, or if anything, it's criticized. And I think, to Singeh's point before, a big part of that is just one person that you know, that one professor maybe, that one student, maybe you met them through a different organization, or you met them through a public workshop, you know, in a city that you're working in. And that person is like really gung-ho about it, and you start that connection. So that's what I think is one idea, but I would love to hear everybody else's thoughts on how we can do that. So thank you.
Yeah, so I was going to talk about the intersection of affordability and public policy and architectural quality, basically, in this presentation. And it was about Seattle in general, but specifically the University District, just because that's both where I live, but also where I think it's a microcosm, maybe the greater condition of the city as a whole, because it's been such explosive growth there more than other areas. So that's going to be the kind of case study, if you will, for this. Oh, sorry, it'll be a 10-second delay. So I looked at data from the Housing and Urban Development, from HUD, the Public Housing and Urban Development, and through another website. I didn't actually analyze the data myself, and they broke it down as by cities, major metro areas, which are areas with a population of over 1 million people across the country, and ranked them by the percentage rent increase between 2010 and 2020. And so, according to this data that these people had analyzed, the Seattle area had the highest rental increase in that period of any major metro in the country. So it was a 91% rent increase in 10 years. And that was against a 46% increase in household income. And just FYI, here's like the first 5. So you see the Bay Area is number 5. Well, I guess San Jose is number 2. Number 2 and number 5. Yeah, no,
Except for Denver, yeah.
well, I know, and then it goes on. They have like dozens down the list, but it's even higher than the Bay Area, as you see, which is 73%. And there's also been a higher increase in average income compared to the Seattle area. So similar to here, there's a huge drive for more housing, right? Because the general rationale is if we create more housing, we'll be able to lower our housing expenses. There's this awesome website called seattleinprogress.com where somebody has figured out how to take every presentation ever given to like the design review board or just submit it to the city in general for any kind of construction work and put it in this interactive graphic where you can like zoom in and click on any site in the whole city and it'll show you what's been done. And it usually keeps it for like 2 to 3 years. So this is just the district here of the rough boundaries of it. And that's all work under construction in just the last 2 years. So it's just cranes everywhere. It's like lots going on. But it's just a good, but this is kind of the density of development throughout the city in general. It's just developing really, really fast, which is changing both obviously its physical character, but also inevitably that changes the streetscape, the culture, et cetera, when there's that rampant of destruction and then new construction. And just FYI, in the bottom right corner there, that's the university campus. So, and then that yellow section, as Google likes to do, that's the kind of main retail street, just for reference. And then parallel to it is a beautiful boulevard that comes down and kind of forms this classical plan with the university campus. So in a second here, I will show you just pictures for reference if you're not familiar with the area. The campus itself had, like I said, it's a classical plan. So from the library, which is like the one we just visited today, there's this awesome framed view of Mount Rainier. And they've designed the whole campus so it steps down and it has every building kind of looks into this central way with this fountain and the mountain in the background. And it's beautiful. And then that picture in the upper right-hand corner is 17th, which is this beautiful big boulevard lined in sorority and fraternity houses that leads to the main campus. And then that's just a nice example of like a sort of missing middle type, sort of lower density apartment building, which they have many of, these little Tudor historic apartment buildings in the neighborhood. fortunately, though so far being preserved. Here's examples of new construction.
Right.
Really bad. I feel like, at least from what I've seen, the quality of new architecture there is worse than most any other place I have seen, like in the US at least. Like, it's just extremely, I feel like Portland's architecture is better, personally. From what I've done,
Some of it, yeah.
and this, like, it's just particularly offensive.
That is especially.
Yeah, I don't know, the top right, I don't know.
I don't know, yeah, it was like the bottom left, it's just
Yeah.
all horrible.
The top two are actually not in the district specifically, they're just pictures I've seen on that website. And then the bottom left is a like right restaurant we go to all the time. And the bottom right is one of the larger example. Although only the larger example on the bottom right, I believe, qualifies for design review, because the smaller examples, like the one on the bottom left, I know would be streamlined review. It would just be through just directly to the city. A lot of architects complain about the design review process, as you know, but we'll get to that later. So here's just an example of where that's development is occurring. Here's from one of their packets you can view. So on the top left corner, you see that's like a row of 10 old houses, like really charming craftsman houses from the start of the century. So what's happening is you see whole new blocks of houses are just being like bulldozed to do like these 7-story apartment buildings. So it's a really rampant and aggressive rescaling of the urban landscape. And it definitely is like you see 7-story building, single family house. It's just like, it's a really not very clean.
There's no increment.
There's no increment. It's just like, this is what we're doing, you know? And so there's been a lot of destruction, which is, I feel like, detrimental, like I said, to the culture of the place as well as to the physical fabric of it. So here's just examples, like, and part of the problem with the zoning is that it basically requires an all-yard condition, even on multifamily projects. So these are all, so the lot boundaries have to be preserved, and you have to maintain side setbacks as well as your front setback, which basically creates a condition where when you want to add density and therefore height, you have to do so in these mini towers. So the streets are lined in these awful, weird, like 5-story towers that are all separated out from each other, and therefore inevitably wind up looking like object buildings. Like you can't, there's no ability to stitch them together into a cohesive street geometry, which is one thing architects have always brought up, like, why do we have to have these side setbacks everywhere, you know? And then they're tearing down, obviously, like institutions, like this beautiful old theater, just torn down, they haven't redeveloped it yet. It's like, that's really sad. They've torn down 2 major Gothic churches in our neighborhood, which it would be nice if somebody studied the concept of doing like historic rehabilitation or adaptive reuse. But they're like, no, we can make more density through building a 7-story apartment building there. So anyway, sorry, it's being so love. But yeah, you see, like that's the wrecking ball on that church. And I think it's about to go to the next one too. But anyway, so yeah, that and I actually went to that church before. It's beautiful. Anyway, so it's very sad. I passed by that last time I came to Seattle. I was like, wow, I think that we're looking at development in the wrong way. Like, there's empty parking lots not far, and the politics inevitably of these things and wind up being that you tear down the church, not the build on the parking lot, right? But this is something, I don't know, it's worth discussing as the next generation of people doing urbanism, and how do we address, you know, creating better places. So they created these really nice graphics, which I think the city is trying to do something in a way that's easy to follow, where they just have little graphics where they just say, here's like the typologies allowed within low-rise multifamily, right? And then there's like densities by the neighborhood, and then it just gives you your FAR, your setbacks, etc. So I think the city is trying to do something, but there's all these types basically require an all-yard condition, unless, like, it's even the row house or townhouse types have to be developed within a single parcel. And so there's no accommodation made for neighboring parcels. So therefore, everything has to occur piecemeal. There's no, like, you know, which inevitably is how development occurs anyway, but hopefully one would think long-term in terms of what types want to be developed in a place. So these are just an example of the LR3 zoning, which was on the last page, which is designed to be cohesive within a single-family neighborhood versus in a higher density urban place.
This is a single family?
This is a single-family neighborhood. Yeah, this is like just a couple blocks from my house.
house.
You see in the left and the right there, they're just, this is what was there before. And then, and this, with this one on the bottom left, is right by this beautiful community garden. Yet they built a big fence that disconnects them from the community garden, which is like, why would you do that? But anyway, and so then the next slide is about multifamily residential, which is the kind of next step up in terms of density. And I love the one on the right-hand side once this loads. It's designed to look like shipping containers, but it's not shipping containers, it's fake outlines of what would be a shipping container. It's like, why would you not, at least if you're gonna like do real shipping containers, not a fake version of it. But anyway, but again, the problem is, I think that, I mean, maybe this is a good thing, but they don't allow the amalgamation of parcels to a large extent. So it creates buildings that are like 8 stories, but only like 40 feet wide. And I feel like it's hard to even design a nice facade for something with an all-yard condition in that scale, you know? And so maybe that's the problem. I don't know what the problem is, but I kind of don't have as good a solutions as I have problems. This is like literally my notes while I was developing this presentation. And so there's a lot of local groups that are talking about affordability, and that's good. There's like independent groups, like the Southern Institute wrote an article that was like well publicized a couple years ago saying basically design review is crushing our cities because it's creating this slow process and adding more costs, and therefore we have, you know, get as much affordability built in. And then there's a number of architects that have created their own kind of like whatever grassroots effort to do it, led by this architect named Rob Harrison in Seattle. And so like he has his own group of architects and they might have gotten to know them. Our city council people are really into it. And they usually, and they say density is good, we should limit regulation on it. And they hate design review, right? Inevitably though, the design review board is actually unusually comprised of 7 members of the community who are not designers. It's designed by local business owners, local like there is usually one person who does development or a person who does design on the board, but of the 7 positions, they basically keep the majority open to people who are not in the discipline at all, who are just local members, which is good from the perspective of getting voices heard, right? But they also, of course, would in addition have a local meeting where they actually have public review. So this is the problem is people say that these people are very subjective in what they want because there's no real criteria for selecting them. Like you just apply and then where you just get selected. So people will say, oh, I just don't like that color, or I don't like the way that that program sticks to the street where my kids go to school, or whatever. And so inevitably that's the case in any design review, but particularly in one where there isn't any official who's in charge of it, who's actually that has a background in architecture or development or anything, who's in charge of approving it. And so then there's developers, I have bubble here, so developers looking for cheapness, of course, and usually they actually get along with the affordability activists because they all want more density. And the architects who are usually saying that the design reviews regulations are generally that they like modulation. So if you have a flat facade, they think that looks cheap, and therefore you should have modulation on your facade. But then it creates buildings that have these awful, weird jutting out pieces everywhere, and it has more cost, which of course inevitably is bad for affordability anyway. And you could do something that's better quality if it wasn't necessarily as expensive to build the outline of the form, right? You could do sort of a nicer material if it was a box than an expensive in and out building that's made out of party plank. So anyway, that was kind of what I was trying to get at with this little thing.
That modulation thing is it's a scourge everywhere.
Yeah.
Everyone, every design standard locally has this modulation thing, and it's just totally destroying architecture.
Yeah, I mean, I get the concept. I think it's just about how we look at it.
It's not done with scale.
Yeah.
It's done as just we want modulation, not understanding what the historic pattern of buildings are at a different.
Right, because a lot of historic buildings had modulation. It was just done differently than the way it's done now.
It has to do with ownership. So if you have a building if you have a streetscape that has modulation in it that looks beautiful, it's usually because everybody develops their own piece, like the row houses, and you get different types.
Right.
But if one developer comes in and does a giant building with a bunch of different
Right.
the difference there is literally just ownership. And it's the idea that, developers are buying up big blocks, so everything looks the same. All the details look the same.
Yeah.
It's just the materiality that's
Right.
all over the front.
It's all over the place, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, you do have historic buildings that do a good job of
Yeah,
not being
exactly.
modulated or modulating in height and
Yeah.
not in footprint.
Yeah. So anyway, it's a topic we all are familiar with, but that's I talked about. Thanks. These are some of the sources. There's other ones, but I was just trying to get something that sounds legitimate here. So.
I'm gonna be talking about missing middle housing and what it is and what are some of the barriers and challenges to
Oh, for sure.
missing middle housing. And this is to also help us as we go on the tour and start to look at some types out there. So what is missing middle housing? Missing middle housing is their house scale buildings with multiple units in walkable places. And those 3 keywords are really important: house scale, multiple units, walkable places. House scale meaning that it is the size of a house and it fits in with houses. Multiple units meaning that there's more than 1 unit in it, or 2 units. And then walkable places. And let's see. So some of the key characteristics of house scale are that it fits in with a residential neighborhood, and you can find that in the number of stories. In height, it's usually two or 2.5 stories. The parking is usually limited. We, at least here at Opticals, we advocate for no more than 1 parking space per unit. And the footprint of the building should be such, it should be almost the size of the smallest or the largest building that you would find on that block. And when we talk about multiple units, that's where the distinction of missing middle and just regular multifamily needs to be emphasized, because as Max mentioned, housing is a problem in many places. And people want to build more units and reduce the affordability. And so missing middle is an opportunity to address some of those challenges. But when you talk to community members and you just say we're building, multifamily, it's not multifamily. It's house scale buildings. It just happens to have multiple units in it. And that leads me to some of what are the barriers for missing middle right now. Missing middle housing, there's a range of types ranging from a duplex all the way up to like a multiplex large, which is a small apartment building. It still fits in with a neighborhood, but it just happens to have more units in it. And this range, you don't need to have all of the types in the neighborhood. You can have one or two, or you can have all of them. So some of the barriers that we have with missing middle is because a lot of cities today regulate by density. They say this zoning district, the maximum density is X. And with missing middle, you really can't regulate by density, because when we compare the densities that missing middle types achieve compared to what the zoning districts actually allow, we find that the types actually have way higher densities. For example, you can have like a 5-unit building on a small lot that's generating a density of say 30 dwelling units per acre. And then you have a gigantic, 3-story apartment building that's on the entire block, and it's generating a density that's less than that. And so you can't really compare the two together, because if you're just going by density alone, then you could say, oh, this, and if you're comparing by density alone, and you say you cap your density at 25, then this smaller building that has fewer units but fits in with your neighborhood could get kicked out because you said, oh, our max density is 25. Now, another major barrier with missing middle housing is parking standards, parking requirements. With the growth of the highway system and people moving out to the suburbs, everybody has cars, and cities started requiring parking for development, and the parking requirements they don't account for how people actually use a place, which kind of relates to the next one of the key distinctions of missing middle, in that it's located in walkable places. So walkable places means places that have amenities, housing, jobs, restaurants, things that you can actually walk to. So if you have places that you can walk to, there's really no need for you to drive and have a car. So parking requirements is something that are a huge barrier to missing middle, because if you have a building that's 4 units and you require a minimum of two parking spaces per unit, that parking lot is going to eat a lot of the lot. So that's another really big barrier to missing middle. What else do I want to mention about it? Places that you can find missing middle. So missing middle, it kind of creates a bridge between the single family house and the large apartment building. And you can use it in different ways. You can find it in the middle of a neighborhood because it's going to fit in with the houses that are there. Or you can use it to transition from like a main street that's higher intensity back into a neighborhood. So it has a really good function to help with scale, because that's one of the issues that people have with development today, that there's no relationship to the new development that's coming in and what has been there for a long time. So missing middle can really help to transition from some of higher intensity places to more residential areas. What else?
Cincinnati has some amazing stuff, by the way.
Missing middle. Yeah, I thought Atlanta had some really nice missing middle in it too. But
Yeah, it was like hanging out around some of the historic neighborhoods, just tons of great duplexes and triplexes, but even like mid-size apartment buildings, which is another thing that we're missing. You know, there's the huge complexes, but like the 8s and the 16s.
Yes,
sort of scale.
yeah.
And they had tons of really nice units mixed in, amongst mansions and so forth.
Yeah. That's really all that I wanted to share, and then just some tips for spotting missing middle as we go on the tour. One of the key things that we look for is look for meters on the building. If you see multiple meters on the building, then that indicates to you that there's multiple units there. You can also look for, like, at the front of the building, there's multiple doors. They might have a letter ABC, multiple mailboxes. That's another key way to easily spot missing middle. So that's what I wanted to share. Yeah.